on Standard D1. This will be a short-ish video. For Standard D1, I can explain the purposes of and differences among sample surveys, experiments, and observational surveys. This standard in particular doesn't have any math work attached to it, just the ability to identify and understand different types of surveys that are conducted every day by businesses, governments, schools, and other organizations. When you understand the type of survey that's been done, to get certain data or information, you can determine, as a consumer, whether it is valid or biased, or how accurate the information is before you take it as truth. We're going to identify or define some terms first, and then go through several examples in which I give you a scenario and you have to identify what sampling method is used. Okay? So you might need to pause the video to copy down some of this stuff. But the first thing, population. Population is a group of people or objects you want information about. So if you said the Dansville population would be anybody who lived in the city or in the town of Dansville. Sample, a small subset of a larger population. So if we thought of Dansville as a population, a sample might be just maybe 20 of the families that live in Dansville. So not all the families that live in Dansville, but just a group of them. Biased sample, so you have a sample which is a smaller subset, and then there's two types. You can be biased or unbiased. A biased sample overrepresents or underrepresents part of the population. So a biased sample might be you only ask the families that live in the subdivision. That doesn't represent everybody else that it could be. An unbiased sample is representative of the population you want information about. So an unbiased sample in that scenario might be a random picking of families that live in Dansville instead of just being in one area. Alright, so types of samples. You have self-selected. Self-selected, the members volunteer. So you say, I want to give a survey, who would like to take the survey? Systematic, a rule is used to select the members. So you have a group of people or of a population, and maybe you decide to select every other person. So there's some kind of rule attached to it. Convenience, easy to reach are selected. So example, those in the front row in a group. You just ask the people in the front row. And then random, you have an equal chance of being selected. So in that case, like when eventually you get called for jury duty, there's an equal chance for every adult to be called for jury duty, and they're randomly selected. So that's not really a survey, but that's random selection process. Okay, for example 1, we're going to classify samples. The situation is a sports writer wants to survey college baseball coaches about whether they think wooden bats should be mandatory throughout college baseball. Identify the type of sample described. In Part A, the sports writer contacts only the coaches that he has cell phone numbers for in order to get quick responses. Okay, so in looking at the 4 samples that we have, the coaches aren't volunteering, so it can't be self-selected. There's not really a rule. He's not saying I'm going to call every other coach. Convenience would be actually the one that this would be, because he's only selecting the coaches that he has cell phone numbers for. It's because he wants it to be quick and easy. So convenience, sampling. Now, when you answer these types of questions for me, when you're getting tested on this type of standard, I will want a reason for it. So you would say that this is a convenience sample. You have to give me a reason. Because the coach only selected easy accessible coaches. And I should say the sports writer, not the coach, because the sports writer is the one who's contacting them. Okay, for Part B, the sports writer mails out surveys to all the coaches and uses only the surveys that are returned. Okay, so then if we look at those 4 options, you have members volunteering, a rule, convenience, and random. In this case, it will be self-selected because they have the option to return the survey or not return the survey. So they are volunteering to do that survey, even though everybody gets it. He's only using the responses of the people that send them back. So this one will be self-selected. The reason, because the coaches decide to fill it out and return it or not. They don't have to. Okay. So you have to be able to do that. Be able to read a situation, read what kind of sample is done, and then identify what type it is. For example 2, identifying a biased sample. The manager of a concert hall wants to know how often people in the community attend concerts. The manager asks 50 people standing in line for a rock concert how many concerts per year they attend. Tell whether the sample is biased or unbiased, and explain your reasoning. In this case, the example or the sample would be biased because he's only asking people that are already standing in line for a rock concert. So they're probably already more likely to go to concerts since they're already in line for one. So the explanation or the reasoning that you would have to give me, you'd have to state that the sample is biased. And again, give me a reason. In this case, it's biased because the manager is asking people already in line for a rock concert they are already more likely to go to concerts to begin with. He's not calling up 50 random people from the phone book. He's asking people that are already in line for a concert. Okay. So for ways to choose unbiased samples, you're going to make a list, assign numbers, use what we call the random integer function in your calculator. The random integer function in your calculator, if you go to, I'll show you here and then we'll do it on the next page too. On your calculator, if you go to Math and then go to the Probability menu, you'll see the random integer selection there. So let's say you have a list of 20 people. If you put it in 1 to 20, you want one random integer selected, you're going to put in a 1, and you'll get 15 as your random integer. If you want to select, I think you can do it this way, 4, I should write this as 4. Oh, between 4 and 20. So I think if you just kept, yeah, we'll do it that way. So random integer between 1 and 20. If you just keep hitting it, it'll keep selecting random integers. Okay? So for example 3, you are a member of a prom committee. You want to poll members of the senior class to find out where they want to hold the prom. There are 324 students in the senior class. We're supposed to describe a method for selecting a random sample of 40 seniors to poll. Now, describe a method. Usually I want some steps identified. The first step to selecting a random sample, which is the best kind of sample to have, is you're going to make a list of the 324 seniors and assign a number value to each senior. So you print out the class list and you give everybody a number. From step 2, we're going to generate how many do I need? 40. So we're going to generate 40 random numbers. between 1 and 324 using the random integer function on the calculator. Okay. If you didn't have a calculator, you could put the numbers 1 through 324 in a hat and then draw 40 numbers. Or you could, like they do this in the lottery, they put all those numbered balls in the little canister thing, they roll it around, and then they select, like, I don't remember what it is, 5 or 6, are randomly selected. So that would be all cases that would use the random integer function, but not on a calculator, just in other ways. But since we have the calculator tool, we're going to use that for the most. So in this case, you'll notice in the list that I had that 5 popped up several times. If that happens, you just discard that value and have it generate a new one. So in this case, we would, if I actually wanted you to come up with those 40 numbers, you go to Math, go to your probability menu, go to random integer. We want 1 to 324. We want all the numbers to be selected in there. So here's 43, 89, 15. 15 is repeated twice, so we would not count that second 15 and instead generate a new number and then keep going. Excuse me. Until you get to 40 integers. Okay? And then step 3, we're going to choose the 40 students assigned to the random numbers that were generated. Okay. Notice we don't have to actually come up with a 40, we just have to describe a method for selecting a random sample of 40 seniors. So those were the descriptions. You make a list, you generate, and you choose based on the generated numbers. That's basically that section. The other 2 standards, we have some math in those 2 standards that need to be done. Like in this standard, we use data to estimate, so we'll be looking at actual data. But this standard is still important because when we generate data or when we come up with data, and if you're ever in a job where you have to do a survey, you want the results to be accurate. Well, this is how you get an accurate sample. You make sure it's unbiased, you identify what kind it is at least, so that you know what your data represents. One that you'll hear about often coming up is they poll people, or like who they're going to vote for president, let's say. You have to be really careful of those polls because depending on who does the polls, they might only be calling certain people in certain cities. Well, that's going to be biased depending on, who's running for office and where they're from. And if they're calling people in the town that the presidential candidate is from, they're probably going to get more people who are going to vote for them because it's a biased population since they came from that town or city. So just keep that in mind, especially with stuff like that, not to let that stuff sway your opinion unless you really dig into where that data is coming from. Because I've personally never been called to say or to ask who I'm voting for, so I'm not sure where they're getting those polls from, but not everybody is asked. So, all right, that's it for today.